Let's see what's in the hopper today. I actually never really know where my dissertations, where my presentations on YouTube may actually go, but I'll just fill you in on my thought process today. And I was thinking about um, subterfuge, and it's problematic to discuss how we are fundamentally undermined. The world we live in, the reality we understand to be a certain way is not what it appears to be. This is something that is a premise that I have adopted, which is contrary to the idea that, well, you know, everything just is out there exactly as it appears to be, and there are presidents and politicians and religions and history and dinosaurs and ancient history and recent history and 7-Elevens that are just what they appear to be. Well, I guess on some level, it is what it appears to be, because you go into a McDonald's and you order a hamburger. I haven't done that probably in about 30 years, at least 20. So, you know, the idea that the world is not what it appears to be is very crucial to the way I perceive myself. And it's an important thing to actually separate myself from the things that are clearly subterfuge or outright lies. The the presentations that we see people talking about stuff they believe they understand or know. And here's like a premise that I have in terms of identifying subterfuge. And this may be a little bit to some people over the top, but as long as I'm talking about someone else out there, it's going to be problematic. It's what I've been saying, what I have referred to as being in the headlights of the man, of the world. The man means the reality that is perceived to be exactly what it is. This is the man. It's not just one person that is behind this. It's something that is encompassing. It is saturating our experience. What I understand to be the man, and I choose the word man very consciously. It's not the woman, it's the man. So this is, I think, the reason I'm bringing this up, what's in the hopper today, the reason I'm bringing this up, and you see I've removed myself a little. I felt I was always too close to the camera. Let's see how this turns out to be. The reason I'm bringing this up is my sense of the reality. Reality, forget reality. Let's just think about this YouTube experience where people present stuff, and it's a lot. I mean, I don't know how many hours of uploads happen every second or minute or whatever. It's a lot. So from that perspective, I say this is an experience that is quite called a social media experience. It's quite prevalent. I mean, I'm using it. I'm part of it. So here I'm attempting to lay a groundwork of where things are, where we become derailed with perceptions that are not what they appear to be, like people presenting stuff on YouTube. Well-meaning people. I'm not disparaging good souls out there, but that make presentations. But what I'm saying is there is a flaw that I perceive, that I'm harping on, that I talk about, and that is all the good YouTubers with good intentions are always focusing on a reality that is actually not what it appears to be and trying to unravel it. But in unraveling it, they become part of the subterfuge. This is very complex from the point of view that a lot of people call themselves truthers, like they have insights into some sort of, they have a personal sense of meaning and depth to what it is they've understood about living and existing, but fundamentally become undermined by a conformity even that suggests to us to always be on an external focus. I'm going to clarify internal, I'm going to attempt to clarify internal and external. This is where I find for myself to be feeling much more myself when I deal with what is the internal part. There is obviously, I can lie to myself just like people lie to each other, and intentionally or unintentionally. There are things, and Freud called it the unconscious, and Jung and all the psychologists and psychiatrists, they're always dealing with this part that we can't really recognize, but we're struggling to make sure that we're not in the grips of some kind of habitual deception, self-deception. And this is ongoing, by the way. This is not just because you say, oh, there is deception and we're being undermined and all that. It doesn't mean the actual, this is quite ironic, but the actual awareness of it may also be part of the deception, which is why it's very complex to be able to filter out that which has no value or meaning. I'm talking about myself, how I filter things out that have no meaning. And quite often I'm invigorated by insights that people present about the world out there that actually makes sense and may have reality, in the highest sense of the word reality, backing them up. But where I end up, obviously, I make my work, I rely on my own sensibilities and insights at any given moment when I make a painting, for example, or any other activity, no matter how trivial it might be. If it comes from an inner conviction, an understanding that I'm doing it because I verified something within myself that works. This is very important, that works. Works is very important. You don't want something that doesn't work. You don't want a car with 3 wheels. It doesn't work. This becomes the issue for me now when I make my presentations, not to be caught, as I often say, in the headlights of the man, or the man being the reality that is not what it appears to be. And this is, I would say, my experience of this is that a very high percentage, well over 90%, or even close, maybe even 99% of everything that I perceive that comes towards me is actually a kind of subterfuge, hiddenness, willing or by intent or unintentionally. So how do I navigate this? And it's not a problem if you use this medium just as entertainment and just brush it off. I think that's quite legitimate as well. It's kind of like sitting down and watching a movie that is a pretense, yet you pretend it's like a fantasy of some kind. And I don't have a problem with that. It's getting less enjoyable as I understand the subterfuge, but at the same time, I think I can still I get a degree of pleasure out of watching a fantasy going on. But when it comes to what is reality, what we understand to be the real world, there is it's not a good idea to be entertained by reality, because what we have is, well, right off the get, there's a hell of a lot of suffering going on because people refuse to understand that the world as it is presented to us is actually not the world that we want even. And so when that happens, there's suffering, there's difficulties. And I'm not a big fan of suffering. I'm not going around flagellating myself like the Stoics and the the religious types. But my thought about navigating the world and coming a little closer to what it is that may be reality is to shift away from a story that is not fundamentally coming out of a center of self, that part of us that has verified something, and it generally has nothing to do with what's happening out there. It has to do with what it is that I'm thinking, I'm feeling, and the actions associated with my own personal experiences. So, okay, so you'll say, well, there's so much shit going on. Let's say, for example, now the latest event is that I think is out there that appears to be quite important is this Epstein indictment. Whether or not they're going to nail this guy, whether they're going to throw the key away, this is something that I actually pay attention to. And I did a video on Epstein for over 25 minutes, and I scrapped it because I was, again, doing this focus on the world out there, with the exception that I alerted people to a person that counters the Epstein phenomenon out there that actually works, which was a person that I really admire called Kevin Annett, who has fought for justice on behalf of the vulnerable. They happen to be in Canada, the Aboriginals, and there are just not Aboriginal children that have been abused and are being ritually abused and murdered every day by some very dark forces that are out there that are pretending they're not dark forces, but they really are. And I drew attention again to this advocate for the vulnerable, how he exposed the Aboriginal Native people genocide, the residential schools. And that was really the only part that I felt was presentable to you. The story, the Epstein story that everybody covers, yes, he's a despicable maggot who is taking advantage of people. And again, when I say that, I'm deviating from where it is that I want to come from and give an example that the world that matters is an inner world that will be reflected to myself, to you, out there once it has grown or matured to be truly that, what it represents. It's kind of like, I've mentioned this before in terms of my understanding of Kabbalah and the letters that are being used by Kabbalists, I mean the true Kabbalists, the alphabet that is being used to express a concept, the letters themselves are physically not what they represent. In other words, they have an innate quality that can't be changed. Like ABC, or the word you spell with your ABCs, you could say, as Shakespeare says, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. That's the idea. In Kabbalah, it doesn't work that way. It's probably the closest way of using language that is innately wholesome and true to itself. And you'd have to study this to understand what I'm talking about. I'm not going to go into this, but to represent ourselves, our essence of who we are, is really the exercise that I believe we're engaged in this, on this plane of existence. Whatever our reality, this experience, we breathe, we live, we are bags of blood with metabolisms, all that kind of stuff is happening. I am convinced is happening. Yes, it's happening, but not from the point of view of an external understanding. It's happening from an internal understanding. And as we proceed through this exercise of understanding what this world really is, we come to terms with primarily a perception that originates within, not out there. So I'm just gonna keep this short, and I wanted to do this because I talk about this a lot, and I admire and I respect people that present us with the facts, ma'am, out there. But this is not the origin of our becoming, of our recognition of what is the highest part of ourselves, of myself. It's not rooted in the world out there. And you know, you're going to say, okay, so what? Shit happens all the time. And just because you have your fancy about an inner world or whatever, the inner world is everything. That's what I'm saying. Without ignoring our day-to-day lives, the inner world is everything, which is why I've always enjoyed looking at other people's art, making my own work that represent a world that is not fundamentally out there, it's within. It's a phenomenal tool. It's a phenomenal tool. It's not the only one, but it's a phenomenal tool to exercise this understanding of a rightness. I always refer to conscience as being part of this ability for us of doing the right thing on every level. We have been given within creation. There is this incredible aspect to what it is that makes us human that is called a conscience. And it ties directly to this concept of the inner world, our inner world. So my criticism of YouTube, the subterfuge, is fundamentally that most of the people that I perceive are continuously focused on a reality that can never ever be understood until it has filtered through that inner reality, that inner world. And I find there are obviously as basically it is entertainment that I gain from presentations that I vibe with that continuously still focus on the world out there without giving me some indication of an inner, deeper sense of what it is we're experiencing. I encourage people in which, in some form or other, when you make your YouTube presentation, whether it be a pure work of art, let's say, or whether it references directly something about yourself. This will actually create a context for me to relate to something that is not the subterfuge that is being perpetrated. And it's very difficult to escape this. This event horizon, the subterfuge of the external world imposing itself and displacing us from the path that we're on very early on. This is something that has taken hold on such a deep level, what is called culture, which is why I call it the culture of death. It has infiltrated our psyches on such a deep level that we've actually literally have been hoodwinked by the concepts that are being promoted in not just a cultural way, but even in an unconscious personal way, that we gravitate towards everything that is not me or us, or in some way that has to do directly with something that I feel that I have verified, and whether or not I understand it doesn't matter, but I know it comes from within myself. So we're going to listen to all the usual suspects, I'm sure, everybody, you know, and it's entertainment. That's what I say. The Epstein stuff, people suffer, and the reason we suffer is because we attach ourselves to the man's story, the headlights of their story. All of these symbols would disappear the way they are presented. Reality is basically an amalgam of symbols that are presented to us. They're not the real deal. The real deal is probably more like the metaphor of the Matrix. We're hooked up to some kind of weird machine that drains our energy. That's very likely more the case. And the way we stop that is by focusing on our stories, by focusing on that which comes from a personal conviction based on the rightness of something, which is, and I'm going to get back to my my idea of beauty. I'm not even close to being finished with the idea of beauty as having an enormous impact on us in terms of being able to navigate this subterfuge that is being presented as reality. Beauty is an essential aspect of being able to get through these weeds in a way. It's not an end in itself. It's actually it's part of a mechanism, whatever that is, that sensibility that we have to appreciate something is not an end in itself. It leads towards something. And I'll get back onto this. And I just thought I'd do this because I was listening to some people who say all the right things, but continuously focus on the man's story all the time. It's like how bad it is and what the bastards are doing and all that kind of stuff. It loses its impact without that personal touch. That's what I'm saying.